Tom James. As I said, we're being recorded. I am not Tom James. Tom James is home with his son quarantining. We thought it ill-advised to have him come here and infect all of us. So you have me, you'll have Tom's contact information if you want to follow up on more technical questions, which is what Tom would be good at. But my goal tonight is to give you enough to make you a knowledgeable consumer and a worthy adversary for the HVAC contractors that we might engage with in this process. So really to educate you. So tonight we're going to cover a number of things, just a tiny reminder of what HeatSmart is all about. Talk about heat pump technology generally, talk about air source versus ground source heat pumps. So there's two major flavors. Within the air source family, there's two flavors of that, ducted and ductless. And that's D-U-C-T, not D-U-C-K. Then talk about a couple of the different ways that heat pumps can be integrated into your home. Some homes are easy to work with a heat pump, others are more difficult. And our goal tonight is to tell you what's easy to do and what's less easy to do. Talk a little bit about economic factors, which I'm sure you're all interested in. And then we've got some educational material here and online, which will either you can take it or we'll connect you online so you can get it yourself. Why PACE is promoting HeatSmart and why we're working with Bill Craddy, who is the chair of the Energy Conservation Committee here in Bethel, is really it's an environmental motivation for us. You have your motivations of economy, health, the comfort of your home. You have those motivations. Our motivation is really the environmental one. Connecticut has an ambitious Global Warming Solutions Act. The goal is that 45% of our greenhouse gas will be reduced by 2030 and 80% by 2050. As the next set of bullets talks about, roughly 40% of greenhouse gas comes from the building sector. So to fulfill the top 45% and 80% reduction, we have to do something about the buildings. And that's why heat pumps is part of that answer. Just to talk a little bit about HeatSmart Bethel, there are two elements to HeatSmart Bethel. The first, and this was the topic, so I recognize some of you from the March session, is really to improve the efficiency of your home, condo, or apartment. So the cleanest energy that we use is the energy that we don't use. And so that's actually, if I had a choice between having all of you get heat pumps or all of you making your homes very efficient, I would have you all make your homes very efficient. That's the best and first step in this process. What you see up on this graph is there's a bar graph and then there's two lines. And it spans from 2010 to 2021, I think. The blue bars are the number of home energy solutions audits that have been conducted in Bethel. And the orange bars are the home energy solutions income eligible that have been conducted in Bethel. And as we talked about last time, if there's one resident living in a home and they make less than $39,000, you're PES income eligible, which is in this context really good because you don't pay a copay and you get a lot more services. However, if you look at the green line on this graph and the yellow line represents Bethel's cumulative progress over the 11 years that we are represented on this chart. And the green line represents the state average. And you can see, and by the way, as I say this, my town of West Hartford is also below the state average. The goal of HeatSmart is to get Bethel at, or hopefully above, the state average participation in these programs. I think that's a very noble goal. There's really nothing but good in that. Heat pump technology. Whenever I talk to an audience, there's all sorts of people. There could be an astrophysicist in here. If so, you can shut off your mind for a minute, but what is a heat pump? Just to let you know, it's nothing new. We are all familiar with a heat pump. In fact, there's a heat pump in the back of this room. Every refrigerator is itself a heat pump. If you think about it, and most people don't, you've got this magic box, in this case, a silver box, in that case, a white box. A little pump in there takes the heat in the freezer and throws it out into your kitchen. That's a heat pump. Same technology as we're going to talk about tonight to heat and cool your home and your hot water. And it draws its heat out of the white box or the silver box and throws it into the kitchen. So it's an air source heat pump. I hope that made some sense. So you all know about heat pumps, whether you know that you know or not. As we started to talk before the meeting commenced, there are two major flavors of heat pumps. The first, they're designated by where they draw their heat from. This one here, there's this little box outside here. And that's the collection place for the heat. So it's drawing heat from the outside air when it's the winter time, sending it down, and this is a ducted heat pump, which we'll talk about in a minute, sending it down there, and the heat is being dispersed through the house. So air source is getting its heat from there. In the summertime, it works in reverse. It takes the heat out of the house and throws it back into Mother Nature. On the right of this slide is a ground source heat pump. And what you can see is that there's a bunch of pipes that are buried in the earth. We stop well short of the center of the earth where it's really hot. But once you get below, I'll make up a number, 12 feet, the sort of the temperature of Mother Earth stays basically the same. And so if you're looking for a source of heat, that's a great source of heat. It stays about 50 something degrees, sort of no matter what. And so they're expensive to put in because you're digging giant holes and giant trenches. But once you put them in, they're economical to use. So there are two flavors of heat pumps designated by where they draw their heat from. So let's talk a little bit about that ducted heat pump. So once the heat pump, the air source heat pump has got the heat, there's two major ways that it integrates that heat into the house. The ducted air source heat pump basically uses ducts. How many people here have central air or forced hot air heating? Anybody? Nobody. The librarian, Amy she's got ducts. So this would be a configuration that would be useful for Amy to get, because we can use the ducts and we can send that heat to every room in the house. So it's just an air conditioner in reverse. There's an air handler down in the basement, and that's the thing that takes that heat and distributes it. And the ducts, as we said, are the things that carry the heat around. It may be hard for you to see, but this slide we've taken from our neighbor to the west. This is New York, NYSERDA. And this is part of their heat pump planner, which we'll talk about at the end of this presentation. They again stress that a building shell, so good insulation, good windows, good air sealing are really, really important if you're going to get a heat pump. You don't want to buy a big, expensive heat pump. They're not cheap. And then you don't want to buy a big one because your house is weak. Fix the leaks, then get the heat pump. Just a note, for all heat pumps, there are electrical appliances. They're very efficient, but you may have to upgrade your electrical panel depending on how old your house is and if you've upgraded in the past. So just a thought process, and you should ask your HVAC contractor. He or she will probably ask you, okay, what's your panel? Is it 100 amps? Is it 200 amps? Is it upgraded or not? A ducted heat pump. And so what do they look like? I guarantee you've all seen them. You haven't perhaps recognized them, but they look like an air conditioner because that's really what they are. They're just a bi-directional air conditioner. The most typical one that I see these days is Bosch, B-O-S-C-H. And there's the air handler. In this case, the air handler is up in the attic. You can see it's taking the air from this heat pump and distributing it through those insulated tubes to the various rooms in the house. You can have an air handler in the basement. You can have an air handler in a closet. You can have it up in the attic, anywhere like that. One thing about ducted heat pumps is they're efficient as long as the temperature is like above, let's say 28 or 30. So you get an efficient one, and you're going to be in good shape as long as the temperature is not bitter cold, not the polar vortex cold that we sometimes have. So you say, well, Bernie, what's the purpose of that? We recommend, if you're going the ducted route, that you keep your legacy system. You keep your oil system, you keep your natural gas, your propane. And if it gets bitter cold, what you want is a thermostat that are really smarter than my thermostat. The thermostat would know, my thermostat at home knows what the temperature is in my house. My wife and I have a fight for all the months of winter. She turns it up, I turn it down, on it goes. The thermostat I would recommend in this configuration would be one that knows the temperature inside and the temperature outside. And it's smart enough to say, oh, temperature outside is 28 degrees. I'm going to use the natural gas furnace or the oil furnace. Oh, it's above 30 degrees. I'm going to use the ducted heat pump, because the ducted heat pump will be very efficient above that. You can run the ducted heat pump way down in the 20s. It will work, but it will be expensive. You'll use a lot more electricity. So there's an economic break point for the ducted. Did that make any sense?
Are you making a distinction between ducted and ductless in
Yes.
terms of the lowest temperature they'll operate
Yes.
at efficiently?
Yes, but the gentleman here asked the question that is a good clarifying question, which is that we're about to talk about the ductless heat pumps, and they operate very efficiently at much lower temperatures. This has the advantage of it can heat every room in your house. It'll distribute it'll go all over the house. So with that said, let's talk about the ductless. And I think when most people think heat pumps in homes, most people are thinking of the ductless. But they're both important. Again, you see there's an outside air heat collector, but you don't see anywhere an air handler. What you see is little refrigerant lines that go to a specific unit in a specific room. This would be called, this little thing here would be called a head. And the way the ductless works, it doesn't have ducts, so the only way to get the heating or the cooling is to run refrigerant lines through the wall, little holes like this, so they're very easily, for any home, right through the wall. And you hang something, it can be down here at that height, it can be up here at this height, it can be in the floor, it can be in the ceiling. Those refrigerant lines can go to any of those places. So you can have a sort of an inside head that looks just like what's above this gentleman here. Because the refrigerant line is going to one unit, it's very efficient. They'll operate down to -15. In fact, one company called Ducted actually has in their showroom down in Long Island a giant freezer, and they put the outside air collector in there, and they have the freezer set to -15. And they have an indoor unit. This unit, sort of where the librarian is sitting, and it's actually pulling heat out of that -15 freezer. If you can conceptualize that, it's quite a remarkable thing to do. It's a great piece of marketing on their part. You can question, yes, sir.
You said you can run these, for lack of a better word, air conditioning lines,
Refrigerant line.
refrigerant lines above the ceiling. You're talking about inside the house, not up into the attic, because if up in the attic, you got 100-degree temperature swings, you know.
Absolutely.
So it's between a first and second floor, not a second floor and the roof.
That's right. and let me repeat that, that's a very key point. When any of these things that bring heat into the house, it's either the refrigerant lines or the ducts themselves are going to be in the conditioned space where we all live, or in the earlier picture, I showed you some ducts that were upstairs, but you notice how heavily they were insulated. Because if they're up in the attic, in the summer, it'll be 130, and in the winter, it'll be, very cold, 0. So you prefer to run your refrigerant lines and your ducts through conditioned space, if at all possible. If you are in an attic, you want to be heavily insulated, so you don't collect all that heat, pay for all that heat, and then lose it out the window. So thank you for that question.
And each room would need a line and a register to heat or air condition. If you don't have a ductless system,
Yeah.
if you have 12 rooms, you need 12 lines and 12
That's right.
wall units or whatever you call it.
So the point you're making is exactly right. In the case of a ductless unit, you want a unit that is connected to refrigerant lines in each room. You can connect one outside unit to 4 or 5 heads. So you can have one outside unit covering 4 or 5 rooms.
But a larger house would need 2 or 3 of those outside units.
Yes.
Which would up the price considerably.
Yes, and what you're getting at there, and it's perfect timing, is in a giant house, it probably would make sense to have a geothermal situation or a ducted situation. You could do that, but it would be very expensive. If you had like 12 rooms, you'd have to have 3 of these big units there.
Or you could do something, I mean, like if you have 4 or 5 zones in a oil burner heat, you say, well, I hardly ever go in zone 4. You could not run one of these lines, just leave that empty.
Absolutely. And
save a little money there, yeah.
so what the point the gentleman is making is, this is perfect zoning. When you have a ductless, you've got a unit in there, and it's in that room, it's dedicated to that room. You can turn it up, you can turn it down, you can turn it sideways, not really, but you have perfect control over that. So it's a great zoning system. So if my wife and I are empty nesters, we live in the kitchen and the family room, and we would heat those rooms with a heat pump and leave the rest of the house get pretty cold. And that could be very economical in that regard. Just to give you 2 pictures to think about. And again, I guarantee you've all seen these. You may or may not have recognized them. But the box on the left is the outside unit. And the example on the right is an example. There are as many different configurations as you can conceive of, but that would be a unit that would hang on the wall, typically, 6 or 7 feet up in the air. In the ceiling, the floor, or like little registers.
May I ask a question about that? It would seem that in the summertime, you want to have it up high for the cooler to come down, but in the wintertime, you like to have it down low, for warmer to come up.
So
What's the balance?
So the question is, since cold air falls and hot air rises, depending on the season, whether you're heating or cooling, if you have something up like that, the heat's just going to hang around the ceiling. Is the concern. What you'll find is most of these indoor units, they're controlled with a remote. You can change the angle of they have little louvers. Thank you for that. They're little louvers, and they can direct it down. The heat will still, we're not going to deny the laws of physics, but you can aim it down to the floor and it'll come up and warm. Again, the remotes are amazingly accurate. You can cool, you can heat, and you can also just plain dehumidify. Half of what we often perceive as hot is really humidity. And so there are settings on a lot of these that will mostly dehumidify. It's much more cost effective than changing the temperature, and you'll be just as comfortable. That's why those of you who like to go to Arizona or Colorado and it's 105 degrees, but you're not that uncomfortable. It's because it's a dry heat. It's not. So now you know enough to be almost dangerous. You know the flavors of these heat pumps. There is one last guy that I want to talk about. I call him the unsung hero. And it's how we make our hot water. These are very cost effective. I'll just say that replacing your furnace is typically a 15, 20, some cases 25-year sort of cycle. If your furnace is in good shape, like mine are, it's hard to justify replacing them with a heat pump. Or if your air conditioner is typically like a 10 to 15-year cycle. Hot water heaters tend to break down 8 to 10 years, something along those lines. So your chance of needing one is substantial. And I would say air source hot water heaters are very effective. There are some criteria. Do you want to put them in a conditioned space, or in a place that typically is going to stay above 40 degrees? So you can put it like in my basement where it's chilly, but it doesn't get down to freezing. One of the values of it in the process of warming your water for your shower, it dehumidifies your basement. So I happen to run a dehumidifier in my basement. When I get this, I will need to run that dehumidifier less. And they do need, it's an air source heat pump. They do need air and they need space around them. So if you put them in a little tiny closet, it's just going to run and struggle to get the heat because you put it in a closet and it'll take all the heat there is, and then it won't be effective. But these typically can run anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 and a $750 incentive off of them, so that these can be very effective. And there's also reasons that you might not want to get one, but if you fit the sweet spot, they can really be a good introduction to heat pumps. So we've already touched on this a little bit. And part of your job as residents is to think about your dwelling, think about what your values are. You know the sort of the flavors and configurations of heat pumps. Does it make sense to try to integrate them in some way into my dwelling? So the easiest thing to do is if you have ducts, and apparently nobody here has ducts except our wonderful librarian. You can, when it's time to replace your central air conditioner, you can swap it out, put in a ducted heat pump, very efficient air conditioners. So your heat pump, your air conditioning will be better, and you can heat effectively down to 30, 28 degrees, something along those lines. So whole house, I recommend you can really use a ducted system. Leave your existing heating there. Some ways it's better because if your oil burner conks out, you still have this thing which will keep you warm. So you really have a little bit of redundancy there, and you'll have fantastic air conditioning. Just in general, just a concept is heat pumps can be the sole source of heat, but more often than not, there are supplemental. Anybody care to guess one of the leading heat pump adopting states in the country? Give you a hint, Dave. A lot of blueberries, just to the north.
Maine?
It's Maine. So up in Maine, it's cold. There's those blueberries. That's how they freeze the blueberries. They're really promoting heat pumps, but they typically use them in supplemental mode. A lot of people in Maine will have wood, they'll heat with wood, they'll heat with pellets, they'll have oil, but there's lots of times of the year, even in Maine, where a supplemental heat pump can really make a lot of difference comfort-wise. And if you're skeptical, and everybody's skeptical these days, right? You can go to just Google efficiency Maine heat pump, and you can get the story there.
Question.
Yes, sir.
These heat pumps and these zone units to disperse the heat or the cool are all run by electricity.
They're all run by electricity.
Is there an estimate on, how many hundreds of kilowatts a month or thousands of kilowatts a month these things, would run? Because I don't know what everybody else is paying, but I'm paying 27 cents a kilowatt,
Yeah.
It's, if it's running 1,000 kilowatts to do this, the oil might be cheaper.
Right.
Although at $4.50 a gallon, oil is cheaper than anything right now, but.
I think in a few minutes, you should get up here and do this presentation because you may, yeah. So we have a section on economics. And we'll touch on that, but the gentleman makes a good point. These run on electricity, which is expensive. In Connecticut, we have one of the highest rates of electric per kilowatt hour in the country. I think we're behind Hawaii, maybe. But as the gentleman indicated, oil, as we're finding out, is expensive. It certainly is also a geopolitical asset. So it's sold all over the world, and right now the world is wanting a lot of our oil, so the price has gone up.
Well, it also depends on where the electricity comes from. If it's coming from a coal burner's furnace, we're not improving the greenhouse gases one bit.
Yeah.
So
the point this gentleman is making is it matters where the electricity comes from. So at this moment, Connecticut has one of the lowest carbon grids in the country. ISO New England, which is our independent service operator, which actually Mr. Craddy knows very well, we've got Millstone Nuclear Power, which is contracted to run through, I think, 2030. So that's carbon free. We use a lot of natural gas, which is low carbon, if you ignore some of the bad side effects of it. And we have more and more clean generation coming on. So that why we are recommending going the route of using electricity is because electricity has a pathway to become green, whereas natural gas and oil don't. There is something called biofuel, which for those of you who heat with oil, I recommend that you look at biofuel. So they are working on that, but I don't think they're going to get above 50% on that. Whereas we're going to get to 100% a lot quicker. And any of you who want to put on solar on your own roof, you can make it. You can make it here. Whereas I used to have an oil well in my backyard, but my wife made me plug it up. So just kidding aside, you're not going to get oil locally, whereas you can get electricity really locally, like super local. Let me just say one other thing in answer to this question. When you're burning oil, when you're burning propane, when you're burning anything, the highest efficiency you can get out of that fuel is 100%. And you never get 100%. You might get, for a good natural gas furnace, you might get 95, 96, 97%. From oil, you might get 90%. So you squeeze out 90% of that. Anybody care to guess what the efficiency of a heat pump would be?
400%.
400%. And so it varies, but you say, how can something be 400% efficient? The answer is that you define efficiency to be what I have to put in to get out a certain amount of work. And I'll put in 1 kilowatt hour and I'll get 4 units of heat out. So it can have efficiencies greater than 1. So out for air source, as the temperature goes down, the efficiency goes down because it has to work harder. But at 30, 20, even 15, 10, with an efficient system, your what's called the coefficient of production is always greater than 1, i.e. I'll put in 1 unit of electricity and I'll get out 2 or 3 or 4 units of heat. That sounds like voodoo, but look up coefficient of production on heat pumps. 400 is a good guess.
Yes.
Another area that makes heat pumps effective, and we already touched on this, is you can focus it on the rooms that you live in. So if you are empty nesters like my wife and I, you can just heat and cool particular rooms. You do get, so when you put in a furnace, you get one thing, you get heat. When you put in a heat pump, you get 3 things. You get heat, you get air conditioning, and you get dehumidification. So as you say, okay, I have to buy this thing. What am I getting? What am I getting for my trouble? So you're getting those 3 things. And you can also get hot water heating as well. So I'm going to touch lightly on economics. And if Tom was here this evening, Tom James from 2020 Air Mechanical, who's the heat pump specialist, and I've got his contact info later in the presentation, he could go more in depth than I'm going to go. Just to, I'm not going to get out of my zone here and mislead you. But there are incentives to help you defray the upfront cost of purchase. The cost of electricity versus fuel is something we already started to talk about. At this moment, all the fossil fuels, because of what's going on, all the horrible stuff that's going on in the world, they're very high. Will it come back down? I don't know. I can guarantee you this, it will be volatile on out into the future. So if you're looking to have a steady thing, I would recommend heat pumps. And there are certain favorable cases that we'll touch on where it just makes all the sense in the world to really heavily investigate a heat pump. And they would be where you heat with electric resistance heat. And there, we've looked with Bill's help at Bethel. I think there's about 650 homes that heat with electricity, nothing but baseboard electric heat. I call them toasters. That's a very expensive way to heat because you have a coefficient of production of 1. 1 unit of electricity comes in, you get 1 unit of heat out, whereas a heat pump is going to give you 2, 3, or 4 units of heat for every you put in there. So that's always a good case to put a heat pump in where you have resistance heat. If you're going to replace your air conditioner for very little extra money, for very little extra upfront expense, you can get a ducted heat pump that will lower your gas or oil consumption, give you very effective air conditioning, and really lower your consumption of fossil fuel and keep you comfortable. And the other place where it makes sense is where you're just really going to focus on heating 1 or 2 rooms or a few rooms or your bedroom or something like that. Then it makes sense. So incentives can help. What you see here is there's 2 kinds of incentives that are put out by the conservation. If you go to the Energize Connecticut website, you can find, if not this chart, you can find these numbers. You are all paying on your electric bill, and those of you that use natural gas, there's a combined benefit charge, public benefit charge. These benefits come because they take a little bit off of all of us and put it into these purposes. So what I'm trying to say is, in some way, you're already paying for these types of things. So the air source heat pump per ton, and we'll talk about what it means to be per ton, incentives range from $250 to $500 a ton. What's that little range all about? They want to incent you to get efficient heat pumps. So if a heat pump is really inefficient, you might not get any incentive. If it's really efficient, you can get up to $500 a ton. That's the instant discount. And whether you go with 2020 Air Mechanical or another HVAC contractor, and we always recommend that you get multiple quotes if you're looking at one of these situations, they will get that for you. So you can, sometimes they don't even spike it out on the invoice, but they're the ones that are responsible for getting that. The mail-in rebate, there's really 2 cases where you could qualify for a mail-in rebate. And you can see it's $1,000 a ton. So it's a lot of money. And again, we'll talk about what a ton means in a second. Condition number 1 to get that $1,000 per ton is those roughly 650 people in Bethel that heat with electric resistance heat. Even the utilities recognize that this is not a good use of electricity, because in the wintertime, when it's hard for them to produce enough electricity, these homes are gobbling it up. So they'd rather incent you to get a heat pump so that it doesn't put as much of a strain on the grid. So that's case number 1. Case number 2 is this thing called, I have to look it up, the air source heat pump pilot. So what is the air source heat pump pilot? It says if any of you, and I'm guessing some of you do, heat with oil and propane, and you're willing to enter into sort of an agreement, they'll give you this incentive, that's part of what they do. But you say, I'll give you 2 years of my oil or propane bills before you put this in. Once you put it in, I'll continue to I'll share with you what my propane bills are after we put this in. So what they're doing is they're using you, if you will, as an experiment, as a pilot program. They're seeing how effective this heat pump is in reducing fossil fuel consumption. If you follow the rules, and there are other rules as well, but anybody can explain what they are, you get $1,000 a ton off, and that's a lot of money.
For those of us who use wood stoves, how does that mean we're not eligible for that?
Yeah, you would not be out for, if you're heating with wood.
No, I'm heating with oil and wood.
Okay,
But the fact that I'm using a lot of wood, does that mean that I would not be eligible for the $1,000 per ton?
you have asked a question that I don't know the answer to that. That's a really good question. So for those people at home who may not have heard it, this gentleman heats with a lot of wood, so a preponderance. By the way, I heat with a lot of pellets, so we're sort of in the same boat.
I do about half and half oil and wood.
And I heat with pellets because I try to reduce my consumption of natural gas. How would the air source heat pump pilot and that $1,000 credit operate in that scenario? I don't know. That's a question that we should ask very specifically to somebody more knowledgeable on this than I would.
Does that apply also to the ground source? So I could be out of business on ground source heat pump altogether?
No, the ground source are just a different thing altogether.
But your mail and rebate with the star applies to that column.
That's a good question too, but I think the air source, the ground source heat pump. Tell you what, let's save that question for Dandelion that's coming on May 11th. But I think you get that no matter what the case. You can see there is a max over there, so max of 15,000 per home. So this gentleman over here, he had a quote from Dandelion, which I think was $30,000. The worthwhile question is to see whether it included these credits or not. So the 30,000 might already reflect the benefit of those, in which case that's it. Or it might be that when they're all said and done, you might be closer to like $22,000.
I heat with wood.
Okay, so you're another good.
Yes.
Okay.
Don't use it at all.
The easy one is the air source heat pump hot water heater, and that's $750. So just a little bit of trivia. Anybody still play Trivial Pursuit? If you do, you can stump your friends and amaze your enemies, or something along those lines. In the olden days, like before I was born even, as close as they came to air conditioning, they would take a block of ice and they would put it somewhere in the basement and they would blow air over it, and that would cool the house. And basically 1 ton of ice, the amount of cooling provided by 1 ton of ice in 1 day was estimated where the tonnage came from. And that when you work it out in BTUs, British thermal units, it's about 12,000 British thermal units. So the end of the story is if you see a heat pump and it's rated for 12,000 BTUs, that's a 1 ton unit. It doesn't mean that you pick it up in a ton that weighs a ton. It means that it can cool in a day what a block of ice could do.
Just to be 100% clear, it's 12,000 BTUs per hour. It's
Per-
a ton.
yes.
It's not BTUs, it's BTUs per hour.
BTUs per hour, that's
Just to
correct.
be clear.
You are correct. So that's, yeah, 12,000. So that's what a ton is. So oftentimes a big unit would be 36,000 BTUs. That would be 3 tons. You might get an incentive of $750 or $1,500 in that case. If it's a 12,000 BTU unit, you get $700, you get $250 or $500 off. That's your trivia for tonight. We won't go into this chart, but I did say that the way the incentives are arranged is they don't want to incent people to buy inefficient systems. So that's why the 250, which is less than 500, they want you to meet certain criterion, which are laid out here. And the more efficient you are, the closer you get to $500 credit. So they want you to buy an efficient system. This is sort of the bottom line on that. I've confused you. I can see by the sad and despondent looks on your face that I've done a good job of ruining your evening. But I'm just kidding. One thing about HeatSmart, this is a complex decision, and part of the value of this campaign is we have partners. So we have EcoSmart and New England Smart Energy. Those are the HES partners. We have Dandelion Energy, who was here in Bethel even before Pace came in with HeatSmart, and we have 2020 Air Mechanical. And HeatSmart is not about recommending a particular contractor. We ask these contractors to help us with education and outreach. And so had Tom not succumbed, had not come down with COVID, he would be here giving you this presentation. But that's their role. And that's the gentleman or lady that will be coming from Dandelion on May 11th. Their role is they want to sell systems, but their role in this program is education and outreach partners. So all of you who have questions that I can't answer, and there are a lot of questions I can't answer, that's their role in this program, is to answer those questions. And you should mention HeatSmart so they know who is this person calling me up. And the other sort of mysterious entity that I want to bring to your attention is it's called I Heart My Home. It's energy concierge and energy consultant. And so you can call these folks up. And I know these guys, it's run by Kathy Fay, who is New Haven Housing Services. They're a nonprofit. They have an engineer, Michael Yule. It's a pretty impressive engineer with a pretty storied track record. And they have employees. And if you call them up, it's all, nobody comes out to your house. It's all sort of virtual. Say, I'm interested in it. And you can call them for all sorts of reasons and say, oh, I had my HES audit and I've got a problem. I might have mold. I might have asbestos. I have asbestos in my home. So these guys are helping me deal with that. They might advise me technically what to do. They might tell me contractors that they know in the neighborhood. You might say, oh, I want to buy an air source heat pump. Oh, well, they'll hold your hand as you go through the buying process. They don't make any money. We don't make any money. None of us operate on incentives or anything like that. And these guys don't either. So they're completely impartial. They're on your side, period. So I for all of you who are seriously thinking about this kind of complicated decision, I really do recommend I Heart My Home, the energy consultant. And you can go on our website and just click on them and call them. And the other thing about them, I've worked with them now for 3 years. They don't go away. When my hot water heater does break down, I'm going to call them. They're going to give me advice. They know they've got a file on it, so they're kind of forever, sort of. This is Tom James. He said he's not here. This is his contact information. This is also gettable on our HeatSmartCT.org website. Just go to Bethel, which is one of the 5 towns, and I wouldn't call him in the next couple of days because when I talked to him before I came over here, he's not in good. He's going to be fine, but he's not in good shape now. So give him a few days to recover. I can certainly leave it there for one more second.
Thanks. Got it.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You explained, and I realize we're doing this at a fairly high level, and you're giving us an overview and particularly what some incentives are. When I think of financial decisions like this, I always think in terms of payback.
Mhm.
So when you start to look at a project like this, and I realize there's no typical home, we all have people that use wood, that don't use wood, people that just use electric, whatever. What type of payback are we looking at when we make an investment like this?
I think you gave me the setup, which is, I have to say, the payback totally depends on what you're spending now and what you spent. So payback is one way to look at this for sure, but you take sort of your operating costs over the life of the equipment, which is 15 to 20 years, compare your cost over that time frame in the heat pump mode versus the current mode, however you characterize that. And that's the calculation. But I couldn't give you one number. It would probably, no, I don't even want to give you a number because I'll be wrong no matter what. That's something I think you have to actually get the dollars and cents, like get a quote and figure out, do I really want to keep burning wood? Am I getting tired of hauling that in and out of the house? Well, then maybe I really have to realistically say I'm going to pay $4.50 a gallon. You know, you have to do the side by side.
Well, how about if you give me a ballpark? Let's take a worst case scenario like my home, strictly electric heat. And I think you described, if I understood it correctly, to be probably the more expensive scenario that would prevent the opportunity to go to some type of heat pump. What type of payback do people encounter? I mean, just an idea, an estimate, without saying that you said it was 6
Yeah.
years. And no, I'm asking for just some sense of what type of payback you see.
What I would say, if you have an electrically heated home, I would say you're going to cut your monthly electric bills, at least during the heating season, roughly in half or better. So that's going to be the good guy. So if you're paying $700 a month, if you got an average plan, you'll save $350 a month. And then depending how big, like if you have a 1,000 square foot house, it might cost $5,000 or $6,000 to put that in there. So you have to look at the cost of installation and the savings over time. But that would be the best case. And you could do that math easily. All you need is somebody like Tom James to say, hey, Tom, give me a quote. Come out and look at my place. How many outdoor units do I need? How many indoor units do I need? Do that for me. That's what this program is all about. And in fact, if you get that quote, we'll do a what do we call it, a test case on you. We're happy to.
Can you talk about tax savings, income tax savings, or any other things that the state or federal government offers for incentives beyond what the energy company does?
So the question is, are there federal tax savings? And on heat pumps, on air source heat pumps, no. On ground source heat pumps, yes. I think it's 26%. So tax incentives work if you're a tax-paying individual.
When you say tax incentive, is that a deduction? You can take that with deduction, or is it that much of a savings
Yes.
after you take the standard deduction? So
If you're paying tax, and maybe we're gonna have to go in 5
No,
minutes.
I was just gonna say, so I was just saying you take a picture of the name. I'll be happy to email you the presentation after this, so that you'll have all the contact information, et cetera. All right?
So
So you don't have to busy, scratching down.
to make the math easy, if you have a $10,000 geothermal system, which is, you would get $2,600 off of the taxes that you would otherwise pay. So if you had a
it's a
tax bill
subtraction like that.
of $2,600, it would.
Not a deduction, but a subtraction.
Yeah.
Got it.
And it's forever coming and going. They're always saying, oh, we don't want to do that. Oh, we're going to do it. So check, but yes. So that's the
Are there
only,
any state level
What-
incentives at all?
they were the ones that I
I
showed.
thought that was the energy company.
That's Energize Connecticut. So there's nothing else.
Is Connecticut the state of Connecticut, or is it something? to do with-
Energize Connecticut is a state volunteer board that oversees the program, the utility programs, efficiency programs. So it's very.
It's funding from the state from the government or from the energy company?
From you, the ratepayers, through the energy companies,
Right.
goes into a fund, and the state plays a governance role over that fund.
I see, okay.
It's pretty,
Understand.
A couple of pennies added to 27 cents per kilowatt goes into this thing.
Yeah.
And that's what you draw off.
That's right. It goes, the utilities collect it, and the state says, here's how you're gonna spend it. The conservation and load management plan is the thing you look at.
What is this website?
What I would like you to go to would be heatsmartct.org/Bethel. I'll send a website to Amy and she can get it out to you. In fact, so one thing I want to point out is on this website is something called the air source heat pump buying guide. This evening, I've got a couple of them there, so not enough to go around, but I can't tell you enough. Please find this on the website, or we've got a hard copy over there. Take it, read it. It's not hard reading, and it will make you a great consumer. In particular, I just showed, and you can't read it, but it's a checklist of things that you ought to talk to your contractor about, so that when they come in, you're asking them questions. You're a savvy shopper, in other words. So it's over there physically, and it's on the website, and you can just download it, either which way.
How do we know the efficiency of these systems? Are they honest?
So the question is, how do we know the efficiency of these systems? Yeah, they are all listed. There's a website, New England Energy Efficiency Partnership, and they've got them all listed. The things we steer you to are what's called cold climate, they are the more efficient, and you can find them. You should ask your contractor to do that. Yes, they are honest. I mean, it's Mitsubishi, it's Daikin, it's Panasonic, it's LG. They're the manufacturers of this. It's American Standard. These are real companies. So they are honest. I talked about I Heart My Home, and I think this is important. You have an energy consultant, and I would urge those of you who are thinking about this process to take advantage of them. That's why they're part of this program. And HeatSmart covers the cost of them to be your advisor. So it's free to, it's no cost to you. Amy is going to send this out. We've got a couple resources here. I don't know if we'll have time or not, but we would like to show you a funny little video. That's the first one there, the fox and the heat pump. But if you haven't seen a heat pump lately, that's when our program manager went and she talks about how quiet they are. Those of you who are familiar with This Old House, this is kind of a technical video. It's a couple 10 minutes long, and this is actually a calculator that does some of the comparisons of fuel costs. So these are kind of technical resources if you were to go to the next round.
Show your video.
Yeah, if we can, yes. And we'll go right to questions, which have been going on. Just to let you know, May 11th is, it'll probably be virtual, depending on COVID. That will be a chance for you to talk to Dandelion. Hopefully they won't get COVID. We're going to try to show you this video, which is just a cute little video.
Hey, don't, yeah, come on, have
I
some
wanna
faith in
do
my,
Hey, where are you going?
Are you talking to me?
Oops, sorry. My mistake. Couldn't see you without my glasses. I thought you were the gingerbread man.
Oh, for crying out loud. Why doesn't anybody know who I am? I'm a heat pump.
Well, in my defense, we don't have much call for heat pumps here in the forest.
Well, let me just ask you this. Is your den hot in the summer and cool in the winter?
Well, you could say that.
Almost everyone I know could use a heat pump. They heat and cool your home, and they are the most efficient technology out there.
Sounds like a heat pump is just what I need to make the den more cozy. Hey, before I head off, did you happen to see the gingerbread man on your way in?
Let me just say,
oh, sorry, there you go.
the most amazing thing you've seen tonight is Amy and their technical wizardry and having a multi-faceted Zoom session like this. Thank goodness that you're here.
Oh, that's fine. Let me just get to the end of the presentation here for you.
Happy to come on the 11th so you have people to look at.
So, yeah, so this is, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that one on the 11th. So thank you very much. I do happen to love that little fox. And
One question,
yes, sir.
noise on these units that dispense the heat and cool in the rooms, not ducts, the ductless
They're
ones.
quiet.
I mean, they're not like a window air conditioner that groans and drones all night long.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that. So they are really, really quiet. In fact, the second video that Deb filmed, she made that first one. She's actually in a showroom of another HVAC person over in Portland, sort of off the river. And she's in the room, you can't even hear them. So they're very quiet. I have a central air conditioner. When it comes on, and the lights dim and all that, you don't hear these things. They're basically, they're not silent, but they're quieter than almost any other appliance. So they're very, very quiet. That's one of the pluses. All right. Guys, you've been fantastic. Thank you very much for coming out.